Facebook in just a second. So give me a minute so I can do this. Hello and welcome to the Dr. Lisa Show here on KUHS Denver, the stream. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm so excited for my guest today, and so I won't spend a lot of time reintroducing myself, but if it's your first time listening, the show is about living life your way. This year, I'm focusing on life on the loose, and what that means is the music's still on. Ooh. What that means is be good with the technology first. Okay, I think I got it now. Life on the loose. Making the choices that work for you. We just get so swayed by the world around us, and this year I want us to focus on, joyfully and happily, on what really resonates with us and what really matters, and to let go of some of our old ideas and views and restrictions and judgments, and which is why I have today's guest on. So if you're a returning person, thank you, thank you. If you're new, thank you, thank you. I'm so glad you're here. I have an amazing guest. She's been on before. I have the honor of calling this woman friend, and that is not something I take lightly. So let me, as you know, I like to have guests on the show who have inspired me in some way. I remember the day I met this woman, and I was spiritually lost, and from that moment on she has offered me a hand and a light, and it's amazing. So I'm going to introduce her by showing you this book, Living in the Present Moment, A Divine Design. Now, one of my friends saw this book and said, oh, that must be about Buddhism. I said, no, actually this is about Judaism, and that there's gifts within the philosophy, the beliefs, the practices of Judaism, just like there are in other faiths, that speak to everyone. And my guest is the amazing author Ellen Hutt, educator and just sort of all around amazing person. Ellen, thank you for joining me today.
It's so good to be with you. I love that I get to come back. You know, I always love our lunches that we have together,
Yes.
and being on your show with you has the same feeling of sitting across the table and having lunch and catching up on our lives and interesting ideas that we're thinking about. So thank you for having me again.
Oh, I'm so glad. And you know, Zoom has made life so easy that we can actually connect wherever we are. So, you know, here's my first question to ask you. And I know your life journey, and I don't need you to explain the entire thing, but you've really shown me that a faith that is sort of has a reputation for a lot of rules and a lot of restrictions is actually a gift of openness, of a way to honor women, a way to honor our own spiritual path. Can you sort of give us just a little history of how you got where you are, how you got to this sort of being an educator in this world?
So when people ask me when I started teaching, I always say in kindergarten that I grew up out in Littleton in the public school system, and there weren't other Jewish families there. And while some people didn't appreciate having their religion recognized or noticed, I loved when the teacher would say, and now Ellen will tell us about matzah or a Hanukkah, and I just relished those opportunities. Mm-hmm. So my first teaching was really to people who weren't Jewish, to bring them into the conversation of what I was doing and how much I was enjoying it. And it really has been just a blossoming of that same approach and idea, only with more people in the Jewish world and the not Jewish world.
Right. And since I started this way, let me just ask you this question too. You and I have talked about this, that if I had brought you on and said, oh my God, she's a Buddhist teacher, everyone would go, oh yeah, Buddhism, that's cool, right? We say Judaism and people think it's restricted to a small group. Can you just address that, about how actually there are more teachings to share?
So Judaism has two paths. One is a path for people who are Jewish, But the Torah and the Torah wisdom is meant to be shared with everybody. that the Jewish people are told to be a light unto the nations, and the assumption is that it's not a light that we keep to ourselves, that it's not a religion that proselytizes. People don't have to become Jewish in order to benefit or join in, but to share in the wisdom is really meant for all of humanity. So I've always enjoyed that idea, and realizing and recognizing that self-actualization of the individual as well as self-actualization of humanity is the goal of Judaism, and that there's a path that is provided to help it go as smoothly as possible given all the challenges that there are living in the world, of how to not have to make every mistake and how to self-actualize and to protect oneself emotionally, psychologically, spiritually from obstacles that impede that process. So that's how I see Judaism, that's how I practice it, and that's how I like to share it.
That is an entire show all by itself. Just that little paragraph right there is something you'll have to come back. We'll have that discussion at some point.
Great.
But what I want to talk about today is we're in the season of, right, coming into Pesach or Passover. And honestly, this is one of my favorite holidays, and even though there's a lot of work involved, and this is the one I really want to talk about. So before I do, I want to go back to your book for a minute, right? So this is available on Amazon. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So there's a whole area in here about each of the holidays as well as other, right? Not just the holidays. And so as you're listening, people, this is for everybody out there, Living in the Present Moment, A Divine Design by Ellen Hutt and Tina Slatkin, co-author. And so we're going to actually maybe grab a little bit of what's in this book, right, as we talk about Passover. So
Great.
Let's sort of start there, that what most people know about Passover, they learned from Charlton Heston splitting the sea, or a coat of many color, I mean something, right? They learned.
Yes, Prince of Egypt.
Yes, right.
Those of an Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. Yes.
Right. So let's sort of talk about the deeper meaning of Passover, and just start wherever you would like with that, all right?
Okay.
And go.
Great. So one of the things I'd like to start out with is that the story of Passover and the enslavement in Egypt, which in the book we call Mitzrayim rather than Egypt. Mm-hmm. Egypt is just a location. I mean, it was a real place and we really were enslaved there. However, Mitzrayim, the Hebrew word, comes from the word that means constrained or restricted. Okay. And there's even a psalm, Min ha-Meitzar Karatiyah, from this narrow straits I called to you, God. Mm-hmm. So that allows us to experience the idea of the liberation or the freedom from that constriction in a much more global way rather than just the event itself. Right. So this story is probably one of the most well-known stories throughout the world. I mean, we know that the slaves of the United States, that they turned to, go down Moses. They used all of the imagery. Even the Mormons used the imagery of enslavement, of leaving and coming to the promised land, to America and going to Utah, and you'll see biblical names there that are the land of Israel. So this has become an iconic story that is embedded in certainly the Western world psyche, and it has many applications. And so I like to start with that, of understanding that it applies to individuals, it applies to groups, and applies to nations, and it can be also a meta story for all of humanity, that we are trying to free ourselves from this Meitzar, from this narrow place of constriction that goes back to keeping us from fulfilling our true potential. I think the idea also of freedom is different than is often understood. We think of being free from, and what Passover is really about is being free to, because we go from enslavement to the Pharaoh, or those things that are trying to crush us and keep us from becoming our true selves, to the obligation to serve the infinite creator of the universe, which is all about expansiveness, that the creator doesn't need anything from us other than for us to self-actualize. And so it is a freedom to self-actualize. And so therefore we need to be free from the bondage that compresses us and oppresses us. And that's the overall metaphor.
Right. So there's the story is often told as sort of a historical story, but there's a deeper secret meaning, a metaphorical meaning for each of us as individuals, is what you're saying, right?
Exactly. So as we said, that what happened historically serves as an historical reminder, but we need to know that the process is ongoing. Mm-hmm. And that it's interesting, in the Torah itself, it says we are to remember the Exodus from Egypt every single day, which is really interesting because you would think maybe like, let's bygones be bygones and move on. But we have to remember that we have almost an inclination to bondage. We have an inclination to become constrained and restrained, and every day we have to remember that we're not, and that we are free to become who we are meant to be.
That just gave me chills, right? That this is, and that we remember as opposed to tell the story, right? It's our story, as opposed to a history lesson.
Right. So if we keep it as a history lesson, then it has, more or less significance depending on how interested you are in history. But when it becomes a path that we are constantly walking, we say, thank you for not making me a slave. I am not a slave. And how often we think about, people who suffer from all sorts of things, whether it's a major addiction or a minor thing, that we become enslaved even to ourselves. Mm-hmm. We become enslaved to our whims, to our habits, to our, who knows what, mm-hmm. to, as you said at the beginning, to opinions that are around us, telling us that we need to be or do something. Mm-hmm. So there needs to be an ongoing awareness that Mitzrayim is maybe one of those laws of nature that is it's like dust on your furniture. You can dust and dust and dust, and it's going to keep coming.
And it comes back, I know.
It comes back. And it becomes, your car is, as you drive it, it's going to tend to lose its balance. And, you can't just steer by having your hands on the wheels. You have to manage it and direct it. And I think Mitzrayim tells us that there is this, whether it's self-inflicted, self-imposed, or other, there is a natural built-in tendency to end up in this place. And it is an effort. So it's called an avoda. And it's this interesting. The word avoda comes from the same word as to be. It means to work, but it also means a slave. So you can either work toward and be a slave to your whim, or you can do the avoda, the work, to be free. It's like how we say about democracy. It's not a given. There is a bend towards totalitarianism. Mm-hmm. There's a bend toward the negative that has to be recognized as a reality in the world, and that it affects the individual as well.
That I almost have to stop and process some of this, because when the difference between, and one of the things I love about talking with you, the difference between simply telling history and keeping a story alive inside me, means that it's relevant today, that everything is always, it's a living document. It's a living story. It's not my past. It's who I am in the moment. And right? And that's one of the things I've learned from you. Let's dig in, because the narrow place, sort of Mitzrayim, right? And I always picture old Egypt as being built along the Nile, so it was narrow. It was one of the ways I picture it. But also, I had somebody say to me the other day that the story is really bloody. What's with all these plagues? And I'm just wondering, can you, let's talk about why the plagues are important in the story.
Okay, it's a great question. And some of these are hard with our modern sensibilities, because we like to see at the end of the movie that no animals were harmed in the making of this movie.
Right.
That's not this movie. That's not what happened. So when we look at the purpose of the plagues, the Torah itself gives the reason. And it was to demonstrate to the Egyptians that they were living in a world of illusion. They worshipped cows, they worshipped goats, they worshipped beetles, they worshipped snakes, they worshipped the Nile, they worshipped the sun, they worshipped Pharaoh, and that it's not okay to live in a world of delusion. And we'd like people to live in reality. And so the plagues were a demonstration of who is really in control of every aspect of creation. So that's why it goes from things in the, I won't go in any order, but
Right.
just the order
Right.
of the plague of darkness was to show that God's mastery over the sun. You're worshiping the sun, I can darken it immediately. You're worshiping the Nile, it's your life-giving, I can turn it to blood, and you won't be able to drink for it, and it'll poison all your plants. You worship the animals, we're going to give them animal infestation.
Right.
You worship the frogs, they're going to be in your dough. So it was a demonstration of mastery of who is the infinite creator of the universe. And they weren't actually designed really to punish the Egyptians. The only plague that was designed to punish the Egyptians that really caused death was the killing of the firstborn, was the last one. And that was just because they had killed the Jewish babies, they had enslaved, imprisoned us. That was the only punishment. The rest was really an object lesson of, we're going to have a theological cosmic demonstration
Right.
of who the infinite creator of the universe is.
Right. And honestly, some of those plagues simply remind me of climate change. They remind me of, right, we think we're in control, right? That I can control the climate, I can control the rivers, I can control the food, I control, not so much, right? That I don't have that power as a human being. I can think I do, and it can look like I do for a short time, but in actuality, I don't.
Right. And it's a question of being oriented to who is the infinite power in the world. And this is important, and this is not necessarily people don't necessarily like to think about this exactly, but our relationship with the infinite creator of the universe is a moral relationship. So when you are a idol worshiping, you're worshiping the sun, or you're worshiping whatever, your goal is to get the power to do what you want. And whether that's sacrificing virgins or, doing whatever,
Right.
it is meant to barter and bargain, as opposed to God
Interesting.
is the moral and wants to see moral behavior. And there's no way to pay off. You can't write a check big enough to buy off.
Wow. So it really is a story about, you have to be involved in this. You have to make a choice to leave your own narrowness, your own constriction, right? To
Right.
have this sort of spiritual journey, right?
And it's interesting that you say that, because it says that not all the Jewish people left. Some of them
Right.
actually died in Egypt
Mm-hmm.
not because they were scared, but they did not want to make the choice to be free. Because real freedom is actually kind of, takes a lot of work.
Right.
People think, you sign up for this religious thing, and then you don't have to make any other decisions. Like, oh no, that's where the decision making starts. Is when you decide to really be free. It's like somebody who decides anything.
Mm-hmm.
You're deciding to lose weight. You're deciding to exercise. You're deciding to break a habit. It becomes almost, you have to think about it all the time of how you're going to support the decision that you are making to become who you want to be. Yeah, I remember, you had a friend who bit their nails. You're like, well, just stop. What's the problem? It's like, well, that's not my issue, but it's their issue.
Mm-hmm.
It actually takes a lot of work to be free. And we have to taste the bitterness of it, which is part of the Passover Seder, where we have the maror, the bitter herbs, is we have to taste what the bitterness of being enslaved is. Because people who are not free to become who they are, they may think they're having a good time, and in the moment they are. You stand at midnight and you eat the whole carton of ice cream, so that tastes good for the moment. But really, it's bitter. It's bitter to be enslaved. But sometimes we have to taste it to know that we want to leave it.
And we have to taste it to know we're actually enslaved.
Exactly.
Right.
And it's interesting because the Jewish people and humanity, we are enslaved all the time, and it's not until we recognize it, which is why, again, in the world of addiction, sometimes I say it's not until a person hits bottom. They lose their savings, they lose their family, they lose their job, they lose their mind, whatever it is, and then they can taste it. So it said that until the Jewish people cried out to be able to say, we don't want this anymore, you can't be free until you know. And that is an interesting thing. So we have to almost feel the pain of it and not walk around in our world of being anesthetized, or as a rabbi used the word, since the river in Egypt was the Nile, it says that many of us are in denial, and that yes, we are have to wake up first, and then we can be free. But there is a process of that liberation.
So to those of you listening, if you've just tuned in, you're going to have to review the first part of the show because it's amazing. This is KUHS Denver, The Stream. This is the Dr. Lisa Show. You can be joining us on Facebook on the Dr. Lisa page, and you can actually make comments there if you would like to. I'm going to open up the line later for you to text, but right now, if you'd like to make a comment or whatever, please just go to Facebook to the Dr. Lisa Show. And I'm playing with my technology here, trying to get back to that page. Technology's been weird. So one of the other pieces of the story, Ellen, and I so appreciate your time on this, is we get to the Reed Sea, right? And it is the Reed Sea, not the Red Sea. And my understanding of the stories is that even though in the movies, right, Moses raises the staff, and that we actually had to walk in, each of us, right? We had to walk in before the water would split. Is that part of the choice we each had to make?
It's a great question. So in the Torah narrative itself, it says that Moses raises his staff and that the sea splits. However, our body of what are called midrashim, which are the further story, elaborates much more and says that the water didn't split until one particular person walked in and out of an act of faith, and that the water was above his nose before it split, and that it didn't split like in the movie, that it split like a zipper, and that it took each step of walking before it split in front of him. And that then the other Jewish people, and how this works, practically I can't really say, but really the people had to walk in as an act of faith and trust that the water would split, and that they had to be willing to do that, and then it did. So it's interesting, we read that passage of the splitting of the sea and the song that the Jewish people sang after they crossed over and the Egyptians were killed, drowned. We read that every single morning. Right. It's part of our liturgy, which I find interesting, because the truth is that every day we face challenges that require us to walk in with faith, whether it's a relationship or a job situation or a health situation. Every day the sea needs to split for us. And so we say this as an act of faith and to remind us that the generations that came before us did it before we did, and we can do it too. So we can rest on their laurels and know I'm not the first person who has had to cross the sea. And so I find that very inspiring to say, like, okay, well, it's not, at least it feels like I'm drowning, it feels like the water's above my nose, but I can do it. And the act of faith created the miracle. So I think that's the other piece, is that we're often looking for miraculous things to happen with not necessarily realizing that our action, we need to do something to start it. So in fact, in the Torah, it says that Moses told the people at first, stand still and God will work a miracle. And God was like, why are you standing still? Start walking. So that there needs to be a triggering action on our part, which tells us that the world is very interactive. It's not just all infinite creator, and it's not all us, but there is a responsiveness to the world around us, and it's interactive, and we need to do our part. And that was the splitting of the sea of their part.
So that reminds me often of the difference between a lot of these teachings and the sort of New Age notion that all I have to do is wish for it. I can just visualize it, I can manifest it just by, and people will often say to me, oh my gosh, you've manifested. Like, no, I worked really hard, which I guess that's a way of manifesting. You're saying these two things have to work together. correct?
Exactly, exactly. They work together. They have to do something. That it can't all be vision. So it's interesting that even going back to Egypt, while they were still slaves, before they left, they actually had a Seder. They had the celebration of their freedom before they were free.
Mm-hmm.
But they had to do something. They had to mark their doors saying, I choose to go. They had to eat the offering. They had to eat the bitter herbs. They had to eat the matzah. And then they could go. But they had to do something. Now, they didn't do the plagues. They didn't do any of the plagues.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, they were bystanders. But then it's like, okay, now you need to do something. And you need to choose. So in Hebrew, that's a kind of a long word. It's called hishtadlut, and it means your effort. And that's part of manifesting, is that you create, what the effort does is it creates the space for the thing to happen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's, if you want to receive goods for your company, you better have a warehouse and have the space to receive it. Otherwise, like, we tried to deliver, nobody home, so we took it back. So there has to be the space, and the space is created through what we would call prayer, of praying and directing, like, God, if this is what you want to happen, please, I'm ready to take it in.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to take the steps that we can take. And that is the combination. Again, interactive. So just like the moral piece is interactive and responsive, the human effort piece is also interactive. This is more like the build it and they will come.
Right.
So do something.
Right.
So do something.
Wow. And listeners, I want to remind you that this show is spiritually multilingual. So if you're struggling with the word prayer or God, just put in meditation or universe and go for the metaphor, go for the content, and don't be blocked by a word that simply stops you. Let's move past that. So Ellen, you and I could do this for hours, and I'm going to ask you which of two questions you would actually like to address. Okay?
Okay.
So one is there's a lot of work, prep that goes into Pesach that I have come to love, but there's a lot of work, right? That's one. You can talk about that. The other is Pesach then starts this whole other sort of holy time that nobody knows about, right? Unless they're Jewish, right? The counting of the Omer. And would you like to talk about one or either of those?
I'd like to talk about the second question,
okay.
Because talk about the language. People even who are Jewish and observe Passover and have a Seder. Passover is actually the most widely observed Jewish holiday in the Jewish world. People might think it would be Hanukkah. It's actually Passover.
Right.
However, what people often lose contact with is the after Passover part. Right. So we talked about before about what was the purpose of leaving Egypt, of leaving Mitzrayim, of getting out of this narrow place. The ultimate goal was to get to a place to receive the divine wisdom and the handbook, the instruction manual that would tell us how to live in freedom. It's like having the Constitution. It's not enough, that the British are gone. It's like, and now what? Right. So there has to be a something. So we have a counting period, which is considered a preparation time of 49 days, 7 weeks, from the second day of Passover until the holiday that is called Shavuot, which is the Festival of Weeks, and some people call it Tabernacle or something else, or Pentecost, Pentecost, from the word 50, because it's on the 50th day that the Jewish people received the Torah, which is the instruction manual, and Torah means teaching. If they just call it something else, it's the teaching of how to live a happy life and have ultimate pleasure in this world. And there's a 49-day process. And many people lose track of that, and we're very mindful. We have an actual count of those 49 days, and we're supposed to be preparing ourselves, our character. So it doesn't say to become super religious or do something like that. It says we work on different parts of our character, because as we said before, being in this relationship is a moral and ethical relationship. And so when we improve ourselves, we make ourselves a better match for the wisdom that we're about to receive. And that's the process. And I really welcome that.
I've learned to love that, the counting part, and it has like a mystical element, correct? That
yes.
The tree of life, the Sefirot. I don't know that you can do like a Reader's Digest version. What is the Masora
Sure.
version of that?
Yes. So when we talk about this preparation, it's divided into 7 weeks, and the 7 weeks, each of the weeks is associated with something that's called a sephira. A sephira is a divine emanation, and the 7 are basically kindness, strength, harmony, what's the word? Being able to, resilience, yielding, integrity, and self-sovereignty. Those are the 7 qualities that are worked on, and they're imitating God. We're saying these are qualities that the infinite creator of the universe has, and that we want to be a good date for that. It's like, I have the perfect date for you. You know, he's a slob, he's a drunk, he's a whatever. It's like, I'm not interested. So our goal is to make ourselves in the image of the divine through working on those 7 divine aspects of our own character, to elevate ourselves spiritually, character, emotionally, psychologically, so that we're at a higher place than we were last year. And that too is an infinite process. Nobody says, you know, I did that last year, I'm done. That it's every year the goal to develop ourselves and to blossom. So I'll just share one image that I always like. Someone said this is not my quote, says that God has a picture of us on his refrigerator. And that picture is of our fully developed self. You know, that it's not the Facebook, you know, it's not the Photoshop version. It's like, this is who you could be. And like when you see a teacher or a parent or a manager can see the potential in somebody and wants to give them everything that they need to help them reach that potential, that's the goal of after we leave Egypt. It's not enough to just be out of the narrow place. How do we then live and thrive in a place of life? And that's our goal that we're trying to get.
So, and I know we're running out of time, and I know you have places to go, but I just want to come back to this. So many people see Judaism as a set of rules, and I've had people say to me, "You're such a free spirit. I can't believe you're sort of moved back into Judaism. You know, was born Jewish, but didn't learn much. Moved back in, studied this, have become, you know, more observant in many ways. It's just a bunch of rules and limits I don't understand." You've shown me that some of those boundaries create freedom, right? Create a pathway that is, where I can be more exactly who I am and not just blindly following rules. And so I don't know, is there like a last thought? Can you wrap that thought up?
Sure, I'll try.
Okay.
So unfortunately, our association with rules goes along with authority figures or people trying to get us to do something for their benefit. They want us to do something that has nothing to do with me. It's more how a child thinks that the rule for brushing your teeth before bed is about the parent and not about the child's teeth. So if they knew that the rule for you need to brush your teeth and you need to eat your dinner before you have dessert, a child would say the same thing. Oh, there's so many rules in this house. It's like, right, they're all for your benefit. So in a way, we are a little bit childlike in that when we see things that we're supposed to do, we don't necessarily connect the dots and realize it's for our benefit. That it's for our purposes. We're not doing the creator of the universe any favors. It's the instruction manual that comes with your sophisticated equipment. And there are many people, sometimes me, who say, you know, I'm sure if I just turn it on, it's going to work just fine. And it's like, no, actually, it's really worth my time to go through the instructions, to know how it all works. What are the, you know, it has a list of things. If this is your problem, you need to do this, you need to do that. Somebody would say, you know, I just can't believe you're giving me so many rules. It's like, I'm trying to help you. If you want it to work well, there are guidelines for having something work well. And the person would be wise to look at those rules and see them as an operating manual in order to have, you know, we're not immortal. If we were going to live for 1,000,000 years, we could make all the mistakes and we'd keep on living. But our lives are short.
Yes.
And so why not work the product in the best way possible? People are also afraid they're going to lose their personal identity. It's like, if I submit to rules, then I'm going to lose me. And that would be like an artist saying, if you're going to make me paint on the canvas, you know, I won't be able to be creative. It's like, no, I'm just giving you the framework.
Right.
You do you. So it's the ultimate expression of individuality, is to be free to become the true individual that we are.
I liken what you're saying to, I have taken sailing lessons over the years. And when you're coming back into the harbor, the red buoys are on your right, red, right, return. The green buoys are the odd numbered buoys. And what you have to do is keep the red to the right and the green to the left, and you're coming in, and you can do anything you want. You know, there's rules about not hitting other boats. Who's got right of way? But you're sailing on the wind and doing something that is absolutely freeing. But the red buoy says you might not want to cross here because you could run aground. Right? And so
that's exactly right.
Yeah, they're more about safety. So I know we're out of time. I just want to give you the opportunity, sort of, any last thing you wish you just want to share with people about Pesach, about the process, about, you know, something that you hope people can take away.
Sure. I think a last comment about Pesach is that in the Torah itself, when God promises that there will be a redemption, He lists it in 4 stages, not just, I'm going to free you. Right. And to me, and then we embody that at the Passover Seder with 4 separate cups of wine. And we talked about this in the book. Oh. And we make a blessing on each of those cups. Mm-hmm. It's not just one thing. That idea of remembering that our growth process is a process, and that we are all works in progress, mm-hmm. and that we should celebrate each stage that we're at. Because on one hand, it can seem like, if this is an ongoing process of becoming who I'm meant to be, I'll never get there. Right. So that could be a little discouraging. On the other hand, to say, I'm not there yet, but I'm celebrating where I am now. Mm-hmm. And to be able to integrate that dual perspective of not losing the vision of ultimately going mm-hmm. someplace, mm-hmm. but recognizing that I can celebrate what I have achieved right now. To me, that message of Passover is something that is incredibly helpful to me personally, and I think can apply to everybody in many situations in their life, their work, their education, whatever goal they have set for themselves, to realize we're works in progress. And hopefully to remember that other people are also works in progress. Right. Because sometimes we want them to be done, like, I'm a work in progress, but you need to be in a different place. To remember that everything's a work in progress. That's right. And we're not there yet. We are not there yet.
And so, contrary to popular belief, Judaism is not a religion of guilt. It is a religion of acknowledgement.
In fact, guilt is considered the work of your lesser inclination that can be discouraging. Mm-hmm. We should only feel guilt to the extent that we did not live up to who we want to be, mm-hmm. because that only when it motivates us to correct or move forward. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it serves no purpose. As soon as it becomes debilitating and self-abasing and all of that, mm-hmm. it serves no purpose whatsoever, and can be very counterproductive.
So thank you for being on the show. I'm going to let you go. I know you have so many things to do, and you know, we're going to have to do this again at some point.
I love it. It's my pleasure. It's so fun to be with you. Thank you. Thank you to everybody who's listening.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. So to everyone out there, this is the Dr. Lisa Show on KUHS Denver, The Stream. That was my amazing guest, Ellen Hutt. Her book, Living in the Present Moment, A Divine Design. I really recommend you get this. You don't have to be Jewish. The same way that you might buy a book on someone who's writing about Buddhism and think that it integrates, or a book from a philosopher, or a book of poetry. Just finding ways to be inspired. And if we're going to talk about books, and we're going to talk about these narrow places and kind of reflect on much of Ellen's conversation, you could buy my book too, by the way. It's my second novel, Dark Fire. Both of my books, Way of the Well and Dark Fire, both my novels, have a Jewish undertone, but they're very inclusive, very multicultural. And they talk, the undertone is often about women healing their lineage wounds. So there's the sort of spiritual aspect. This one has a vampire, a really sexy vampire, who's a really good kisser, and a magic dog. Oh, and kind of a mystical octopus. Oh, who falls in love with a horse, which is just amazing. and a closet that gives you clothing. I really think you'd like it. Again, available on Amazon, Dark Fire. Okay, so now what I'd love to do, if you have comments about anything you heard, any questions, things you'd like also to in the future for this show, go back into the Facebook site and post me some ideas, some thoughts. Give me a thumbs up. It's Facebook, Dr. Lisa Show, and you can post. I'm live there. If you'd like to text me in the studio, it's 720-386-0513. Let me do that again. 720-386-0513. And you can text me your thoughts. I'd like to go back to this notion of narrowness and the way that Ellen talked about it and the way that that affects us in our lives. So many, I mean, she talked about, not just slavery, right, but that the enslaving of self, the routines that we get into that we do maybe mindlessly. I'll give you an example. Before 2020, I was going to the gym quite a bit, and I was doing heavier and heavier weights because that's what one does at the gym. And I was visiting my chiropractor more and more often because things were hurting. Obviously, I should have made this connection and realized that heavier and heavier weights were not actually doing me any good. Yes, reps, yes, working out, but diversity, different kinds of workouts. I was in the rut of doing something that looked healthy and stuck in that routine. I was in a narrow place. 2020 was a narrow place. And yet I was able, and many of us were able, to change our routines and realize that had been a rut. I don't have to drive in rush hour traffic every single day. Oh my gosh, I can work online and get just as much accomplished. I can work out at home. I can go for walks. I have variety. That often we don't realize that we're in a rut, that we're in a narrow place. And as I said, this conversation about Passover and leaving Egypt is not a comment on Egypt, modern day Egypt. It's a comment about narrowness, and that in ancient times, Egypt as a country was right along the Nile. And so Mitzrayim was simply a name of, it's a narrow place, because, the entire country is along this Nile. The metaphor is the way that we get stuck in our own narrow places. And in fact, at my Seder, we go around the room and everyone is asked, how have you come out of slavery this year? Or where are you trapped in narrowness this year? What would you want to come out of this year? It's so funny. And honestly, join me on Facebook. This is the goal of this of my show with this new format for the rest of the year is to get you to talk to me. So you can text me at 720-386-0513, or you can make a comment in Facebook. And you can disagree with me. That's lovely too. But make a comment. Let me know you're out there listening. The more I get comments, the more I know that in some way I am inspiring you. So remember, like inspiring a Renaissance of Spirit was last year. This year is Life on the Loose. Maybe I can combine those. How am I inspiring you to leave your own narrow places, to recognize your own narrow places, and to find that own way that you can live your own life on the loose? So I want to talk about a couple other things she said, because I have this image. Here are these people who've been in a city and have had the exact same work routine and structure, and it's hard work, and so many of us can relate to that, hard physical labor, and rules that keep them from being able to express who they are. And they walk out, and where are they? They're in a place of white sand that is glittering in the sunlight, blue water that is the same, that the sun is shining on that. They do not have a home. They don't have a solid building around them, and they've chosen this. This isn't choosing homelessness. That's a very different issue, and homelessness is definitely a narrow place. They have somehow managed to choose, with help, to leave their own narrowness and come into this capacious environment, this open environment with hills and mountains and no walls, no boundaries. And they walk together to a place where they hear different rules that help them understand how to live in open places. It's an interesting metaphor. And for me, I wonder also how frightening that was. Have you done this? Have you been alone in the woods? How many of you hike alone? I'd really love to know. There is a Facebook group that I love that's solo women hikers, right? Those women, those of us who go off into wherever by ourselves, maybe with a dog, basically by ourselves. We head off. And some of us have spent nights alone in the wilderness. And there's a beauty to it and a wonder to it and something absolutely terrifying about it at the same time. If I have my dog, I'm better. It's been years actually since I've done this, and I'm so tempted to go camping with just my dog again, because there's something amazing about that aloneness in the wilderness. No walls, no boundaries, and yet I'm one with what's out there. And so it's this incredible paradox of joyousness and some fear, right? That I have this openness. And I think sometimes freedom feels like that. Now let me add, whoever out there listening, that often choosing to leave a situation is a mark of privilege. There are people who cannot choose. They can choose some things, but I just have to put that out there, that we have these conversations in the sort of the new age world as if everybody can just vision a better future and they will then be in a better future. And that's privilege that we can do that. And some people, if you are a single parent and you are working 2 jobs to support children, and perhaps you don't have family support around you, or perhaps you're a person of color, add that to it, or you're working somewhere where there are unfair labor practices and you are not getting paid enough to make ends meet, just visualizing a better future won't do it. As Ellen said, it's a dance, right? It's a partnership. Yes, I have to hope for some miracles and some support here, but I also have to do something. Without that support, the doing something can be really difficult. So I just want us to remember that. Sometimes what I hear from people is just dream it, just visualize it, just do a vision board. It'll all happen. You'll focus on it. It will come true. And it's not true for everyone. And there's always work. And there's always, I think, some fear involved in that. It sounds silly, doesn't it? Like, how can freedom be scary? And yet, leaving what we know for something else can be really difficult. You hear stories of people, it's happened to me actually many times, where we've left a job not necessarily because of our own choice, but we've left. And maybe it was a mutual agreement, but we're out there, and now we have to recreate life in a way. The narrow rut I have been in, even if it was a lovely rut, is not available. And growth doesn't actually happen very often in ruts. It happens when we move. It happens when we make choices. And so part of that, right, is that fear. The other part, I think, is how seductive it looks. Wow, I'm out here. I can do anything I want, right? There's no walls. There's no boundaries. I'm almost blinded by this sort of the beauty of this. It's all a new sensual experience. However, as Ellen said, true freedom has some intimate soul boundaries. Our relationship with the universe, whatever word you like, right? Ultimate being, God, Hashem, the universe, whatever words you like, has like a moral relationship, is an ethical relationship. And so I'd ask you, because I hear this all the time, I really do. People will say to me, I'm spiritual, I'm not religion, and that's lovely, and I'm all for it, and tell me what that means to you. Just tell me. How are you becoming a better person? How are you living up to your soul potential? What is that about for you? Because there's choices, right? Nikki was a show before me, and she often talks about choices, right? How do we make choices about what we eat and how we live, and right? There's choices about what we listen to, what we ingest. Am I listening to the news 24/7, and which news am I listening to? And am I sort of polluting my thoughts? If you are having nightmares about wars, maybe it's time to turn off the news, right? Watch it once a day. Just don't obsess. What can you do about a situation? And obsessing about it is not what you can do about it. That's helpful at all. Can you commit to anything? And I have to say that in this world that gets so difficult, doesn't it? I should be doing something. I should be helping people improve. I should be. And yet those shoulds are another rut often. Okay, this isn't a lecture. It may sound like it, but it's not. I want to say that often we make the mistake of listening to the whispers. This is the easy way. In fact, maybe I'll end with this. There is a story, right, of a man approaching a young woman sitting on a trailhead saying, well, which is the short way? And she says, well, over that's the short long way. And this way is the long short way, so pick. And off he goes on the short long way, and he runs into brambles and bushes and manzanita trees and blah, blah, blah. And he comes back bruised and scratched and says, you said it was a short way. And she said, well, it is. It's a short, long way. If you go the long way, you do the work. It's often shorter. Enjoy the ride. Enjoy the travel. Enjoy. Look around. Have the experience. An example for me in that is I chose to get a puppy, and I have a 6-month-old puppy. And she'll be a 2-year-old at some point and have a brain, because if you haven't had a dog, you don't realize this, but their brain actually sort of turns on at 2, and they're like, oh, look, I am now a dog. But when they're a puppy, they're asking you to join them in sort of the playfulness. But to do that, you also have to get that they are like alligators and velociraptors, and they don't know what to chew and not chew, and they have no idea if it can go in their mouth, they're going to chew it. And there is a way to enjoy that and engage in that and know you chose that, and that without trying to make them be a 2-year-old dog before their time. Okay, I'm hoping some of that made sense. I also like the part that she said about none of this is about blame, right? This isn't a religion. It's so funny. I've worked at a Catholic institution, and they'll look at me and go, oh guys, you do guilt even worse than we do. And I'm like, that's in the movies. That's not real. I don't come from a religion of guilt. I come from a place of, can you reach further? Nice where you are, good where you are, great that you are where you are. Can you reach further? Look how far you've come. Can you go further? Do you need to rest before you try again? All of that is fine. And that for me is life on the loose. How far? Where do you want to go next? Can you reach? Do you need to rest first? Do you need to think about where you're going? I talk about my life as always tacking up wind, right? Always headed in a direction and then needing to turn and go another way, and rarely absolutely on course, even though I know I'm headed ultimately in the right. And again, for me, that's life on the loose. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this. I really do. And I would only know if you will send me some messages. How do you do that? You go to Facebook, you can direct message me there. You can put a message into the Dr. Elisa Show link. You can go to my webpage, elisarobin.com. You'll have my email right there. You can read my blogs. You can send me a message there. You can read some of my blogs on Medium and message me there. Oh, there's also Instagram. Oh, there's also, Twitter. And there's also LinkedIn. There are so many ways to talk to me and to tell me, are you enjoying my book? Are you enjoying my show? What else would you